And we're gonna start with the first presentation with Fotis Mistakopoulos. Have the pleasure to, before just to I'm going to repeat the agenda of the session. I'm gonna have 3 talks and then a discussion at the end, 1 hour in total. The first one, it's gonna be Fotis Mistakopoulos from my colleague in OPERAS, and he will talk about GraphOS and research assessment challenges in the context of social sciences and humanities. Lots of times we're gonna mention SSH, and this is social science and humanities, as you know. Before, let me just introduce you to Fotis Mistakopoulos. It's my colleague in OPERAS. He's a project policy officer at OPERAS, and his work focuses on strengthening open science skills and facilitating dialogue around the reform of research assessment. He contributes to GraphOS both as a representative of OPERAS Services, as a member of the SSH pilot, supporting efforts to recognize diverse research activities and outputs. His background in library and information science provides the foundation for his expertise in open access, open science training, scholar communication, and informed his broader commitment to developing more equitable and transparent research ecosystems. So today, Fotis is going to talk about GraphOS and research assessment. And Fotis, I will give you the control of the slides, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I will try to be very concise. Thank you very much for this introduction, Carol. And of course, I'm here to talk on behalf of GraphOS and a little bit. So my point, what I wanted to do was to talk more. I have more of a reflective mood today because the project is at the end. We conclude this month, and it's mostly to provide a little bit of space to listen to what Licinia and Julien will say after us, because some of the developments that you will hear in LUMEN and GRAPHIA connect to what GoTriple is going to benefit. So what I want to reflect a little bit is the role of open infrastructures in enabling responsible research assessment, some key issues from the perspective of social sciences and humanities in terms of infrastructure and how that relates to research assessment as well. And of course, what is the context that we find GoTriple involved in? So a little bit of a journey, like what happened with GraphOS. But before I go into GraphOS, I really want to show you this kind of output that was developed as part of the Quora working group on open infrastructures for responsible research assessment. And they display 4 key pillars, let's say, 4 key categories, in terms of what is important, what kind of conditions we need to have for open infrastructures to support RRA. And I'm highlighting under each pillar: technical robustness, operational capacity, ethical and inclusive practices, and community-centered practices. One element that I think relates very well to what GoTriple is doing, from interoperability to inclusivity of research in research output coverage, to inclusivity and diverse representation. And here you can get the theme, I think, of what we are trying to do with GoTriple as well. And of course, fair and responsible and transparent research assessment. Next slide. Okay. So GraphOS at a glance. So what we tried to achieve the last 3 years was to develop an open and trusted federated infrastructure that its key goal was to make sure that open science comes closer to the concept of responsible research assessment. There are a lot of developments around open science, and we need to make sure that they are taken into account when we're talking about research assessment and research evaluation. And we do that by producing data, tools, services, and of course, guidance. And the guidance element comes from the Scope plus I framework, which produced a lot of templates and guidelines in terms of how to translate open science principles into an operationalization of responsible research assessment principles as well. And we aim this kind of support for policy reform at 3 levels. So how we assess individuals or small research teams, how we assess research performing or research funding organizations, and how they assess individuals, and how that kind of assessment takes place at the national level. And here you can see an architecture of what the infrastructure is meant to achieve and what we were trying to develop. On the right-hand side, you can see a definition of the tool services and services bundles. And on the left-hand side, I want you to focus on the data registry. It's where we have the data sources, and then, of course, an interoperability layer. which is developed through an API. Then we have, of course, tools and services, and all of this is accessible through a front-end user interface. In our particular case, we tried, especially with GoTriple, we tried to provide data in the first place, and we are also in the process of adding a tool as well. But also we had other services from Opera's perspective that we are trying to include in different spaces of this kind of infrastructure. And in my next slide, I will show you a little bit the interface, which is accessible through this link that you see here, which we can share in the chat after I finish my speech. So on the left-hand side, you can see ways by which you can explore the different resources. So it's more of a browsing versions features. So if you want to look at what kind of options you have to evaluate someone or an institution or an individual or a country or to look at research products, then you can look at, for example, the scope stages, or you can look at the assessment subject as I just described. And of course, here you can see the GoTriple metadata dataset that was included. That was a work that was done collaboratively with other projects, not just from, it didn't come from GraphOS necessarily, but for example, Graphia and Atrium was also included in this kind of work. And there are other data sets, tools, and templates, and guidelines and services that you can find in this platform, which, as I said, it is already accessible. So the point is that this is one of the major contributions that we did from GoTriple into this infrastructure. So, and how did we achieve the kind of interoperability layer that we described earlier? Is we developed an extension, a research assessment extension for the scientific knowledge graphs interoperability framework. And here I'm not going to go into a lot of details because I'm not the kind of expert that, so this slide, so yeah, this is what I wanted to show you, is to develop the extension. We developed a couple of motivation scenarios, and then we gave this kind of motivation scenarios some data, what kind of assessment we would like to see either at the individual level or at the level of an institution. And then our colleagues in GraphOS developed this kind of solution in terms of a data model. And this is the RASKJ extension is available. And the hope is that the more services that are included in the GraphOS infrastructure, the most of the services should provide an API extension. So when you actually access the data and metadata, you get them back in a way that they make sense from a research assessment perspective. But also, so what would be when we're talking about the scientific domain discussion, we have to understand where does this conversation fit in terms of where do we apply peer review and where do we use scientometrics and bibliometrics. So, and this is from a paper that was written, actually this image comes originally from the NORCAM for the Norwegian matrix for research assessment. But also you can see it also through this blog post, the role of scientometrics in the pursuit of responsible research assessment. And you can see that the lower you go in terms of the layers, so when you go to the individual level, the micro level, you have to assess them more by peer review, and this is something that we all agree. But the more you elevate the kind of discussion in disciplines, subject fields, or countries, that's where the application of bibliometrics is more relevant and more appropriate, or at least you can use metrics to do that. But I will not go into this direction because Licinia precisely will talk about this in detail in her talk. So please stay with us so you can engage also in this discussion, because how we use metrics responsibly is always a challenging issue, especially because infrastructure have this kind of element where data is always very important. So, and this was like a segue to the scientific domain issue, and I highlight three particular issues that are also related to infrastructure. So, a lot of SSH research is multilingual, and the problem is that the commercial indices they index publications that are primarily in English. That means journals that are publishing in English. They have more international scope, and that means that when we publish research in local languages, and when we publish research, for example, that has local relevance, this does not get the visibility that it deserves. And here I mentioned journals, but also think about books. And books are very important for SSH. And that means that we really need to think how multilingualism effectively turns into bibliodiversity. And we have to have more kind of outputs, which is my next point. So the diversity of outputs is important. We have also translations or book reviews are important. And then, of course, we have policy contributions from the SSH perspective. And then, but all of this, and imagine this kind of local relevance that I spoke about, then we have a lot of local repositories, or at least the information is not concentrated in a few, let's say, resources. You can find them in different places, and it creates a fragmentation. So what solutions can we think of? That's where GoTriple comes in, and we are trying to produce a lot of aggregation of metadata so we can have them all in one place. And then, of course, I will talk about the key features of the platform in a moment. In terms of how do we assess better diversity of outputs, then there we should rely a little bit more on recommendation and guidelines. And we are trying to produce this through the pilot. And of course, when it comes to fragmentation, I think knowledge graphs sort of have some answer there. And I hope you stay with us also with Julien, because at the end he will give you a nice overview how knowledge graphs can support this kind of assessment through the platforms. So where does OPERAS comes in, and why is OPERAS important? So we are an infrastructure, research infrastructure that is trying to make open scholarly communication more prevalent in the European research area. That means we want to make sure that all research is accessible. And one of our key services is GoTriple, which is a multilingual platform. That means you can also browse the platform in different languages. There are more than 10 languages right now. I don't remember the final number right now. And also you can discover more than just publications. And publications, we think of publications as multiple types of outputs, not just in the sense of journal, but also you can discover authors and projects. So think of it more as a discovery platform and of exploration, where you can also discover other things, not just outputs. So this is the wider service catalog that we have, but I want you to just focus on these three particular services, because these are the three that we included in GraphOS, because these were the more relevant, or the more that's where we start when we talk about research assessment in the SSH. So we've already done webinars on Metrics and Prism. You can watch them; they are available on YouTube. And today we talk about GoTriple, as I said. So what are the key features of GoTriple? And here I want you to remember, if possible, I mentioned interoperability in the beginning, plus the SKGIF extension, the RASKG. I mentioned inclusivity of research outputs and widening the coverage, and also equity and fairness in how we do things. And so effectively, what is GoTriple is a search engine that is very specific about social science and humanities. So we want to make sure that SSH community can find resources very easily in one place. We provide multilingual access to these kind of resources, but you can also find resources in multilingual ways. There's, of course, an open access emphasis. It means we're trying to make sure that open access resources get the visibility they deserve. And of course, we have diverse research outputs. I mentioned it earlier. We have 19 distinct content types based on the COAR list, including datasets, softwares, reports, and learning objects. And of course, now there is a new feature where you can curate a collection for you. And you can, once you have an account within GoTriple, you can do your own search, and you can create a very specialized collection about the things that you want to do. And all of these things, I hope, lead us to the kind of ideas that I mentioned earlier in terms of how GoTriple can become slowly an infrastructure to be trusted for research assessment. Are we there yet? I can't tell you precisely. It depends also on the research assessment type and the context of research assessment. But what I can tell you is that GoTriple is continuously improving, and we're trying new features like a Notebook LM style tool, the AI chatbot, where you can interact with GoTriple documents. That's more like how you can work with it individually, less, I guess, for research assessment. But I mentioned the interoperability aspect, that GoTriple is trying to implement an SKG-IF API, and I've been told today that this is actually going to go live very, very soon, once the platform goes through. It goes to be registered in a new servers. And then we continuously add UI languages, and the latest ones are Czech and Ukrainian. And of course, there is a ontology refactoring that again links very well with the discussion that Julien will raise a little bit later on, that the GoTriple knowledge graph, how it will connect with the GRAPHIA work that people are doing, so we can have a more robust kind of knowledge graph for SSH, so you can do different kind of research assessment. So GoTriple, you can see the kind of role it can play in the future in this kind of change. And we have to think of RRA not as a product, but an ecosystem. So a lot of things have to fall into place to make sure that we have an open science aware responsible research assessment. And we should integrate different components from policy to infrastructure and tools. And we make sure that when we assess, at least when we use infrastructure to assess, we understand the representation and semantic relationship of those diverse outputs that we described that GoTriple can provide, and maintain a discussion on what is the responsible use of metrics. And with that, I hope that Licinia now will engage you in her wonderful talk, which I already know what she will talk about. And yeah, so any questions in the chat, and we can discuss them later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fotis, for your presentation. And as he said, if you have comments or questions, please put in the chat, or very soon we can be able to discuss all together. Right now, we're gonna talk about responsible use of metrics and the LUMEN project. For that, I have the pleasure to introduce Licinia Ferreira, who is currently part of the team at the Coimbra University Press and participates in projects related to research information management and scientific published infrastructure, both at national and international levels. She has worked as a librarian in academic libraries, where she has collaborated in disseminating open science practices, supporting the management of scientific journals, analyzing scientific outputs indicators, promoting curriculum managers, and training. She's in charge of the metrics service task within the LUMEN project. And in another dimension, she's also a researcher in theater studies, focusing on the history of theater in Portugal in the 18th and the 19th century, which I found amazing. So let's start with Licinia. I'm gonna again, Licinia, give you the control of the slides, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Carol. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Carol and Fotis. Thank you both for the invitation to be here in this webinar. So I would like to start to say a few words about the LUMEN project. This LUMEN is the acronym for Linked User-Driven Multidisciplinary Network, and the project is about improving and developing discovery platforms, aiming to promote innovative and customizable solutions for data discovery, involving AI-powered tools, multidisciplinary collaboration, and other features that you can see in the slide. The project is EU funded. It is an infra-EOSC project, and at the heart of the project, there are 4 scientific domains. Within the project, we aim to build a collaboration of these scientific communities. One of them is Social Sciences and Humanities. In this case, there is already GoTriple's platform in use, but with the project, we aim to improve the platform with new tools. But besides this one, we have also 3 other scientific domains that we are addressing within the project: mathematics, molecular dynamics, and earth systems, all of them with different needs and different practices in science. About the metrics service task, it is part of the work package 6 multi-platform innovative feature, which aims to build new tools for discovery, to improve the user experience, to reproducibility and the collaboration. And one of these multi-platform tools for discovery is precisely metrics. So with the task, the main goal, the general goal of the task is to develop usage and citation metrics for the LUMEN platforms, including GoTriple, at the levels of publication and not just publication, but other different other research outputs, and at the level of the author profiles. And this within the EOSC ecosystem has to be in line with the principles of responsible research assessment. So as a starting point, the task and the project started in January 2025, so we are within the first year of the project. But we see that so far we have no metrics in GoTriple, but at least at the user interface level. But for example, for other domain of the project in mathematics, they have already a platform in use where author profiles and citation count seem to be important. The strategy developed within the task was, at least for these first months, was more like a theoretical and studying approach. First, analyzing discovery platforms, we selected 23 databases, including GoTriple, most of them multidisciplinary and some of them belonging to the scientific domains which Lumen address. And another point of the strategy was to consult the communities and to see what are their needs in what regards metrics and indicators. Then we want to comply and be aligned with the principles for responsible research assessment. But metrics are not just about research evaluation. They have different uses that need also to be highlighted. And with this, we want to determine which metrics to integrate in the service that will be supported by open infrastructure, such as OPERAS metrics and open citations, and adaptable to communities' needs. So about the first point of the strategy, what are the results of this analysis of metrics in these 23 discovery platforms that we selected? About publication metrics, we see that there is a lack of uniformity in terminology, different vocabularies to the same indicator. However, we can conclude that the number of citations and the citation-based indicators are the most common ones within these discovery platforms. But there, in a few of them, there's also an emerging category of classifying citations according to the location, whether it refers to background, methods, or results, and whether it supports or defers the work. And social media and usage are also common metrics. Regarding the author metrics, we also find that total number of citations and total number of publications are the most common, and related to this, their distribution by year is often present, as well as the H index and some variants of this indicator. Others not so present, but still worth mentioning are, for example, the open access percentage of the publication of the author's publications. And in a few of these platforms, there are also dataset metrics and software metrics, and in them, also citations, views, and downloads are the most common. And about the point of consulting the communities, which is something that we take into consideration across the project. So this was in collaboration with the different work packages of the LUMEN project. So there were qualitative interviews conducted to a number of researchers that belong to different career stages and to different scientific domains. And one of the questions addressed to the researchers within the qualitative interview was about metrics. We could organize their answers in a few categories. One of them is quantitative indicators. And in general, they say that citations are considered useful and a solid metric, but this is most important and more significant in the STEM fields. They also say that the citations allow the researcher to navigate the citation network and discover other publications, which I would like to emphasize because it is another different function of citation that is important to take care of. It is necessary to have access to impact indicators when you're part of evaluation committees, some of the interviewees said. And they also said about the number of downloads that it is an indicator that they look at. But if you can see on the right side with the negative points, they recognize that sometimes it's only after downloading the work that you check whether the text is interesting or not. Then they also said that the number of publications alone is not a determining factor. In what regards social media, the researchers interviewed said that it is not necessarily an indicator of quality or relevance, but many researchers value their presence on social media, and inclusively they say that discussions on social networks can be the start of new research. About the author profiles, on the other hand, on one hand, they say that they can foster a culture of ego in academia, but on the other hand, they can also be important to find out what authors are publishing and what projects they are working on. And of course, about qualitative indicators, they are generally emphasized by the researchers, saying that the value is in the content of the publication rather than whether or not it has been cited, and the peer review is emphasized as the most relevant indicator. Then we also wanted to analyze the manifestos and initiatives on responsible research assessment and to see what they tell us about metrics and indicators. This is a timeline with some of the most important initiatives. They are not all here because there are many, but I would like to highlight some of the conclusions of this analysis and what it has to do with the metric service task of the LUMEN project. First of all, to practice transparency by making available the data and methods used to calculate metrics. The openness of bibliometric data is also fundamental, and it is necessary to take into account various research outputs and differences in publication types. In general, these manifestos and initiatives agree that the research assessment should primarily be qualitative, and quantitative assessment should complement the first when relevant and based on the responsible use of quantitative indicators. Also, to take into consideration works published in different languages is also important to take a broader perspective of the researchers' publications. And the reward of practice of open science is still, it is also considered a very important task to perform. It is not, for what regards the LUMEN project, it is important to say that it is not the metrics and indicators themselves that are inappropriate, but rather certain uses that can be made of them to evaluate researchers or research entities. So, how can we summarize all these principles in the context of responsible research assessment for LUMEN? What are the implications for the work that we are doing in the task? Well, LUMEN, of course, is not an organization that will perform research assessment. We are a project developing infrastructures for open science, and the tools and services that we are building have to enable, or we aim them to enable, the implementation of responsible assessment, to provide tools to help this framework. So metrics will still be needed, but what we have to do within the task is to develop the service responding to this need and complying with the principles of transparency, the reproducibility, the use of persistent identifiers, multilingualism, and the diversity of outputs. But to conclude this presentation, I think I have to speak about some barriers to overcome. One of them is the misconception that Dora and Kawara proposed to ban metrics. Well, it's not the case of a melodramatic thing like good and evil. It's something more complex than that. But on the other hand, the technical requirements and the capacity sometimes may not be able to provide complex indicators to build a fair assessment. And there will always be the social sciences and humanities specificities, such as the use of sources and the delivery of results that are out of the digital world, So we have always to keep this in mind, that some disciplines have results, produce results of their research that are out of these infrastructures that we are building. And within the open infrastructures, there is still a need to further development. And this is in practice, this is a work that is being done by several projects, the development of open science indicators. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Licinia. It's very interesting this work that's being done in Lumen. As I said, we're gonna just keep going with the presentations. It's very soon we're gonna start the discussion. So right now it's time to dive into knowledge graphs and the GRAPHIA project. I have the pleasure to introduce Julien Omo. He is a data and AI architect and the CEO of Oxcub, a Paris-based company specialized in large-scale graph technologies, semantic artifacts, and advanced data infrastructures. He works across several national and European research initiatives and is deeply involved in the development of next-generation interoperability frameworks for scientific knowledge. He currently serves as the technical coordinator of two Horizon European projects, LUMEN, and Licinia has just talked about LUMEN right now, focuses on improving cross-disciplinary discovery and interoperability across scientific communities, and GRAPHIA, which aims to build the first federated SSH knowledge graph and its underlying semantic and technical architecture. Julien's work sits at the intersection of AI, semantics, and research infrastructures engineering, with a strong emphasis on scalable architectures, machine action of metadata, and responsible innovation for open science. So this is now time to give the control of slides for Julien. Just a second. Julien, control of slides, and the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Carol, and thank you both, Carol and Fotis, for the invitation today. Good morning, everyone. In this part of our presentation today, I would like to focus on a simple question. How can knowledge graph bring real value to research assessment? Because most assessment challenges do not come from the metrics themselves, they come from the absence of context. It's often difficult to understand how research is produced, how it connects, or how it evolves across communities. Knowledge graph brings this missing layer. They help us move from counting outputs to understanding contributions and context. That is why they are becoming central in initiatives like GRAPHIA, including the development of the GoTriple knowledge graph built on top of the GoTriple platform and designed to serve as the SSH specific federation for an ecosystem of interoperable knowledge graph. So let me, sorry, this one. Before talking about assessment, let's clarify what a knowledge graph actually is, because it is the foundation for everything that follows. A knowledge graph organizes information as entities: people, organization, project, publications, datasets. Sorry, it's a previous slide, sorry. And the meaningful relationships that connect them. So instead of isolated records, it reconstructs the structure of the research ecosystem. This matters especially in SSH. SSH outputs are diverse, multilingual, produced in many formats and institutional cultures. Flattening all of that into simple metadata inevitably hides part of the picture. A knowledge graph preserves the richness and reveals how things relate, how a project generates multiple outputs, how concepts circulate, how a local community fits into a broader team. In short, a knowledge graph is not a list, it's a map. It shows not only what exists, but how everything connects. So now, what makes, sorry, the previous one. So now, sorry, I'm trying to, okay, this one. Now, what makes knowledge graph powerful, particularly for SSH? To begin with, they connect information that is usually scattered across repositories, infrastructures, format, or languages. instead of living in isolated systems, the different pieces of SSH research become part of the same connected landscape. They also bring heterogeneous SSH data under a shared semantic structure, something essential when you deal with book, chapters, dataset, interviews, exhibition, or any kind of non-standard output that doesn't easily fit into uniform metadata fields. Another important aspect is that knowledge graphs make relationships visible. The links between people, projects, outputs, institutions, or topics, for example. These connections are usually hidden in traditional metadata, yet they are crucial for understanding how research is produced. And because the whole structure is machine readable, it supports advanced forms of exploration, thematic navigation, enrichment, clustering, network views, all the tools we need to make sense of the complexity of SSH research. And together, these elements make knowledge graph a strong backbone for any structured understanding for the SSH landscape. So why does this matter especially for research assessment? Because assessment is not only about producing numbers, it's about understanding how contributions emerge, and that requires context. Knowledge graphs help reveal how research activities relate between project, output, datasets, for example, how ideas and collaboration evolve over time, which is essential in SSH, where knowledge is often cumulative and long-term. Also, where diversity lies, languages, formats, type of outputs that metrics tend to overlook. Also, how communities organize themselves between clusters, network of practice, interdisciplinary bridges, or, for example, who contribute what, roles, grants, collaboration, translation work, far beyond first authorship, for example. In other words, a knowledge graph helps shift assessment from what did you publish to how does your work matter in the broader research ecosystem. Let's look at what knowledge graph captures structurally, because this is where they really go beyond traditional metadata. A knowledge graph transforms fragmented information into a connected network. So instead of isolated records, we see how people, output, dataset, and project relate to each other. It also preserves the many-to-many relationships that reflect real research workflows rather than collapsing them into a flat list. Knowledge graph capture also temporal continuity. They reveal thematic proximity through shared concept or, for example, vocabularies. And finally, they expose the network structure of SSH, the central actors, the cluster, the blind spots. And together, these structural elements provide the analytical foundation needed to understand better SSH research dynamics in a much richer way. One important point I would like to emphasize is that knowledge graphs are not an alternative to metrics, not at all. They play a different role, and the two are actually highly complementary. Metrics highlight signals, citations, usage counts, visibility, or uptake. They can tell us whether something has been noticed, accessed, referenced, or disseminated. This is useful, but at the same time, metrics have well-known limitations. They tend to miss some multilingual or non-standard output, especially in SSH. And this is where knowledge graph add value. They make the relationship explicit. They show the structural position and the role within the research networks. They provide thematics and community-level context, and they capture long-term research trajectories and knowledge creation paths. So metrics give us a signal, and knowledge graph gives us the context in which that signal makes sense. And together, they offer a more complete, nuanced, and ultimately more responsible way of understanding SSH research. So now let me introduce GRAPHIA. And before going into the technical part, a quick word on the context of this project. GRAPHIA is a 3-year Horizon Europe project started in 2025 that brings together 21 partners across 11 countries, all working toward a common goal, building the first federated knowledge graph dedicated to social sciences and humanities. So over these 3 years, the project aims to create a comprehensive SSH knowledge graph that consolidates, aligns, and links SSH information and provide a single access point for exploration, visualization, and analysis. And through this federation, we will build the GoTriple knowledge graph on top of the GoTriple platform in order to be the enrichment of this new hub for SSH. But what do we do in GRAPHIA? Concretely, GRAPHIA works on several key activities. It starts by aggregating heterogeneous SSH metadata coming from GoTriple, but also from infrastructures, repositories, and project outputs in different formats, languages, and level of granularity. When then align this information through shared vocabularies, we talk about the GRAPHIA ontology, but also with the SKGAF interoperability framework already mentioned by Fotis today, so that data becomes comparable across systems. GRAPHIA also links entities across sources, project with publication, authors with institutions, dataset with themes, creating a coherent network instead of isolated silos. And a central part of this work is the GoTriple knowledge graph. This is the main SSH knowledge graph developed and maintained by GRAPHIA. It restructured the GoTriple platform metadata as RDF aligned with SKGIF and SKGIO, which is the ontology behind SKGIF, and enriches it with new entities and relations extracted through the GRAPHIA project. Around this hub, GRAPHIA federates other autonomous knowledge graphs such as JSIS or RKG, Open Citation, and, or EHRE. Through this GRAPHIA federation without centralizing or absorbing their data. Finally, this interconnected structure enables large-scale thematic and network exploration through communities, cluster research continuity, and interdisciplinarity. But of course, everything is still being designed and built, especially this year. But here is how GRAPHIA aims to support better SSH research assessment. First, it aims to bring semantic coherence. Through the GRAPHIA ontology and SKGIF, metadata from different countries, repositories, and disciplines can become comparable, which is a prerequisite for fair and consistent indicators. Second, GRAPHIA is designed to provide a federated view of the SSH landscape. Instead of centralizing data, it connects existing knowledge graph, including GoTriple, HRE, JSIS, ORKG, and Open Citation, as I already mentioned just before. Each graph stays autonomous, but can interoperate within the federation. So GRAPHIA could expose richer forms of evidence that flat metadata doesn't capture. Then it could improve attribution clarity by modeling agent role grants and contribution in a more consistent and transparent way across these systems. And finally, GRAPHIA aims to expose the machine actionable APIs that could field next generation assessment tools or dashboard. So to finish this part, I would like to share a few illustrative questions that a knowledge graph could help explore in future assessment discussions. These are just examples that show how knowledge graph-based context can complement traditional indicators. So one important dimension is visibility and diversity. For instance, which SSH communities, language, or output types are underrepresented in discovery systems. This is a recurring issue in SSH, and knowledge graph evidence can help make these imbalances more visible. Another aspect concerns collaboration patterns. What kinds of collaboration characterize a research area? These structural patterns rarely appear in publication-level metrics. Knowledge graph can also shed light on knowledge flows, how ideas, topics, or concepts evolve across project, publication, dataset, or, for example, communities. This kind of semantic continuity is really difficult to capture with simple metadata. And they can help clarify also contribution on roles as well. For example, identifying which author, institution, or project plays central or connective roles in producing SSH outputs beyond the first authorship or citation counts, as I already explained at the beginning of this part. And finally, they can reveal interdisciplinary signals where themes or communities appear to bridge multiple domains. Again, these are just examples for the moment, but they show how knowledge graph-based context could enrich and nuance assessment practices in the future. So I will stop here for now. I hope this gave you a clearer sense of how knowledge graph can enrich the way we understand SSH research. And I am very happy to continue this discussion with you now.
Thank you, Julian, very much. It's very interesting. I'm looking forward to the next steps in Graphia as well. As I promised, right now, I'm going to stop sharing and let's go for the comments and questions you have. I know already we have some questions here, so I'll start with the one from Rosa Alonso. And you, Julian, Nessina, and Fotis, feel free to start replying. And all of you as well, if you want to add to the conversation, you're all welcome. And also can turn on your mics if you have another questions. So Rosa asks you, or asks us, do you think citations are good indicators of quality? Some papers are highly cited for being bad examples of research. And in the area of language learning methodological, papers are more cited, but it doesn't mean they are good. Aren't there better indicators beyond citations? Thank you, Rosa, for this very important question. And who wants to start to reply this question?
I can start. Okay, thank you, Rosa, for the question. It is indeed a controversial theme, and within the bibliometric literature, there are indeed authors that say that citation is a measure of quality, but there are different opinions about that. Citations can also be a measure of utility, of impact. Of course, we are thinking about a research assessment framework, but the utility, the use of citations is not just within this context of research assessment. It is also an important tool for literature discovery, to find out the networks that are the connections between publications, the references of the authors that we are following. And to build our own work in research, it is important to have access to this data of citations. So if there are better indicators of quality, for sure there are better indicators of quality. We have to take into consideration the qualitative assessment, as I told during the presentation.
You, Licina, Fotis, do you want to add? I'm sure you want to add to this conversation.
I definitely want to add. So I just want to emphasize one thing. I hear everything Licina said, and I just want to emphasize one thing. I agree with the statement and the question, the way Rosa, I think it meant to be interpreted. Citations are not necessarily an indicator of quality. They shouldn't be, and I think this is the work that a lot of the things that we try to do in the pilot, in the SSH pilot, we try to have this kind of conversation. What does it mean to have a citation or 50, or if your H index is of a certain number, what does it indicate? In my recent work with preprints as well, there was also, I saw a study that, the journal impact factor, just to get it again through another view of what citations can do, the journal impact factor can rise, can grow based on one paper out of, 30 papers that are not good. But what if one paper gets a lot of citations? Then the journal impact factor might actually raise because, it works with averages. And then it's sort of this kind of discussion that we always have, that if you try to quantify quality, I don't think you will get the good answer. So at the end of the day, if I had to answer, is there a better indicator for quality? I don't know, and I'm leaning towards the feedback we received to say no. I don't think, at least our audience in the community said, you can't really put a number on quality. So quality is something also subjective, is how you interpret it and how you assess it. And quality is also like a component of things, like how did you do your research? What was your methodology? What was your data? How did all of this come together? And this is where Julien described the kind of connections that we want to see through a knowledge graph, and how you provide, let's say, an image of that through technology, through a knowledge graph is interesting. But I would still not advise us to think of, let's find an indicator for quality, because I don't think this is the right answer. We need indicators, we need data to understand the direction of research, if it's been read, if it's been viewed. But again, some of this can be superficial in some ways, and that's where all of the advice comes from different initiatives that Licinia pointed out in terms of quality. At the end of the day is expert assessment from peer reviewers, from us. So how we guard and how we assess our research at the end of the day. So I think this is something that we very intently try to look at the pilot. So thank you very much. I don't know if Julien wants to add anything.
No, I agree with you, Fotis.
Okay, Rosa or any other people in our audience who would like to add to this conversation? I'm seeing here that Jadranka added a question, and then I'm gonna go back to, there is a question about knowledge graphs, and we're gonna go to that one. Jeroen, I am paying attention to you, just because I think this one comes together with this conversation. So Ross is thanking us for the conversation, saying that I am a journal editor, and I can tell you this is a common concern for editors. We have no doubts about it, Rosa. It's a very common concern, yes. And Yadraga says, are there any possibilities to consider citations in the context, example, location in the article, introduction, methods, positive, negative mentions, etc.?
I don't know if this is something that knowledge graphs can do, but at least I can very shortly answer that in our discussions never came up as a thing. The only thing I have seen in terms of developments around citations is that sometimes they are trying now to understand whether a citation has a positive or a negative connotation. So there are some commercial platforms that do that. I don't know if Open Citations, I think, is developing something along these lines in terms of understanding who references what, or if it's a backward reference or if it's a forward reference. I'm not entirely sure, but at least I know one commercial solution that is trying to say this is a positive, this is a negative citation, and then there are the neutral ones that you're just referencing the kind of work. But I haven't seen something that is necessarily from an introduction, from a method, and then we go into this kind of direction of the kind of work, is it an original research article? Because you can have a lot of citations in review articles, and then you go into a direction of what kind of research is more important, especially when it comes to publication of journals. And here, of course, we need to remind ourselves that not just journal articles exist, and citations have been very prominent and dominant, I think, in many ways, because journal articles are so prevalent in assessment and evaluation practices. And as Ursula points out in the chat, we have to think about citations of different outputs and how they behave effectively, because books have a different kind of behavior, and especially in the SSH, they have longevity. For example, you can cite something for a longer time scale. There are actually articles and papers and books around that discussion. So it's a bigger discussion, I think, that we can have. But I see the passion when we talk about citations. And I know Julien raised his hand, but I also saw Licinia wanted to say something. Julien, if I can, because I think I spoke on ahead of Licinia.
Yeah, I
Very
will.
shortly for both of you, just because I really want to address the other question as well before we finish. Thank you.
No, I was just, I would like to add what Fotis was saying is that the problem for open infrastructures to build this kind of citations is the problem of access and licenses to the full text of the publications. So then it can be an obstacle to provide an indicator with the good quality of regarding the location of the citations within the work. So there's also always this kind of problem of licenses and access to the full text.
Yeah. Thank you, Licinia.
And from a knowledge graph point of view, of course, we have two types of sources to address this citation part. Of course, as I already mentioned, open citation is one of the different federated knowledge graph. So we can reuse the already existing citation, but also we have a dedicated team which is working on reference and citation extraction, entity linking, and metadata enrichment, not especially the positive or negative assessment we could identify for this citation, but we are working with different tools, not only existing tools like Grobit dedicated for this specific task, but also new innovative things based on LLM approaches with different models. That's why we could imagine some solution to enrich this citation process with some additional indicator based on these new models. Of course, we have to think about it, but it's clearly an important part of our work, especially in GRAPHIA.
Stay here, Juliana, and I invite you to stay a couple of minutes more with us to address this question from Jeroen. I hope I'm spelling your name correctly, it's saying correctly. How can we integrate indications of societal impact in our knowledge graphs and other infrastructures? Currently, we are fully dependent on commercial tools for that. Can include metadata and mention citations in the full text of 25 million policy documents in our open infrastructure. For us, that would be the value added of, for example, GoTriple. Juliana, I invite you to reply to this one as well.
Yes, and that's a great question. And I fully agree that the societal impact signals are extremely important, especially for SSH. For the moment, we haven't prioritized these indicators directly in GRAPHIA because the focus has been on building the semantic backbone and the federation layer and the GoTriple knowledge graph itself. But there is already a strong technical foundation for integrating this kind of signal in the future, especially because I already mentioned we are working on the citation through the entire knowledge graph. This is an important path on our work. But even if we cannot ingest or redistribute the policy documents, we can integrate the structured signals coming from them through the mention, citation, links to researchers, something like this. So yes, it's not a feature today and it hasn't been prioritized, but the infrastructure we are building already point in that direction. And the enrichment workflow we developed for GoTriple metadata could definitively be extended to incorporate, I suppose, open policy impact signal in the future.
Thank you, Julian. Fortis, Licinius, do you want to comment on this question as well?
I really want to comment from one particular perspective, and I can't answer the question from a technical point of view. That's not my point of view. What I want to bring here is again a reminder of the Barcelona Declaration. So and because the contrast, or at least the idea and the philosophy of Barcelona Declaration is how do we move from closed commercial publishers to open infrastructures, and we often think of that like against the big commercial publishers like Elsevier, Springer, because they have the majority of the journals, the academic journals, and where the research goes. But every time I hear about policy impact and citations in policy impacts, all the roads lead back to Overton. And here is the real answer. How can we, and I bring back what I said in the beginning about open infrastructures, the principles that we have, the transparent assessment and everything. So it's important, I think, to think whether there can be an alternative and whether we need to think also this kind of output, which infrastructure can provide this kind of data? Where can we find this data that are openly available, managed properly, and what is the alternative effectively to commercial solutions? And I think once we do that, I think the answer would be, I think we would find a way to integrate. That's what I was trying to say. That the more we have open infrastructures that maintain this kind of data, I think the possibilities then are endless for us to bring them also into GoTriple and other knowledge graphs, I think. At least that's my thought. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Fortis. Just want to bring also loudly here what Julia shared with us in the chat, that there are researchers developing text mining on positive and negative citations, not only commercial ones, but for open infrastructures. And she heard, for example, about the open citations, and Sinobo are working on this direction. And it's good to remind that open citations is a part of GRAPHIA project. And yes, we are all working together towards the same direction. So João asked, we could collaborate with Policy Commons, maybe? Maybe.
I don't I need to check that the yeah, is there a link for the policy commons? Is that I can find it. I'm happy to I'm certainly going to research on this.
Yeah, so we can keep going. I think we have to close this session right now. We are already 3 minutes over the time. I really want to thank you first, our speakers, and you all that were here with us. Of course, this is a conversation that has to be going on. It's important issues for us. And I really hope to see you all in other webinars, in other conferences, in GRAPHIA project, in LUMEN project. GRAPHIA is finishing. So I think in the next chapters, we're going to see each other in other projects. Thank you very much for your presence, for participation, and our dear speakers for all the contributions. Thank you, and see you next time.